that, we bring in former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, now a distinguished fellow at the Hudson Institute and a Fox News contributor. Good to have you here today, sir. So you have Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, saying to Putin, I think you should use tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine. And then you have Dmitry Peskov, the longtime spokesperson for Putin, essentially saying this is an emotional moment in our country, and every region should have their say. Are we at a boiling point, a tipping point here with Putin?
Martha, it certainly feels that way. I wouldn't put a lot into what Kadyrov says. I know who he is pretty well. But it is important to remind everyone that we've been in these places before. And whether it was October of '62 or where we find ourselves today, America always led the way through with resolve, with quiet diplomacy, with the capacity to make clear the things we were prepared to defend and the things we were prepared to give up in order to achieve that. We've watched great leaders do that over time. This will require enormous nuance, enormous skill, enormous resolve from President Biden and leaders in Europe to walk our way through this and avoid what could be cataclysmic.
So our Pentagon, through the Secretary of Defense, has said that they don't see any hard indication that there is any move towards using nuclear weapons on Russia's part. But Putin came out and in a stunning ceremony, very, huge. They brought in all these people to watch it and to cheer him on. And he said, the United States is the only country in the world that has used nuclear weapons twice in Japan. So they set the precedent. What do you say to that?
Well, he's factually correct that we have used nuclear weapons before. But his idea that somehow that justifies the use of a nuclear weapon, a tactical battlefield nuclear weapon, or that ought to be his policy is just absolutely ludicrous. His people are not threatened. No one has threatened Russians. This has been an act of aggression by the Russians and the Russian leadership, not a response to an attack on his nation. So the analogy that he's trying to drive is completely incompatible with what's really happening on the ground. He brought this upon himself. His failure, his military's failure on the ground is certainly, to your point earlier, it is humiliating. It's a point of pride for him now. We have to all collectively find a way to resolve this in a way that doesn't result in him feeling like he's going to use a nuclear weapon. He should also know that should he choose to do that, there will be enormous costs imposed on him. That's how deterrence is delivered. That's the old Reagan model of peace through strength. It can be done again.
Well, you mentioned October of 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. What would you recommend if you were in that room now in terms of how to walk this back, how to give him a little bit of room to maintain some sort of, semblance of pride, I guess, in order to get him to not take this step?
Martha, I think that's right. It takes both ends, right? One has to continue to demonstrate resolve. So the fact that the administration is continuing to provide the weapon systems so the Ukrainians can defend their own sovereignty. At the same time, I hope there are lots of conversations that neither you nor I know about that are taking place at multiple levels along multiple lines, not just between the United States and Russia, but between the United States and other parties in the region, including the Chinese Communist Party, who has provided tacit support to Vladimir Putin, making clear to all our expectations. If we do that and we can conduct those negotiations well, we can both give the space that is needed and ultimately resolve this in a way that defends what Vladimir Putin attempted to take through pure aggression.
Well, it's clear a lot of people don't want to fight this fight. They're running, they're fleeing from the country. And when you don't have the people on your side, it's a destabilizing factor, to be sure. Quick question on Iran, because we've been watching this closely. And now the Ayatollah Khomeini has weighed in on the unrest that is happening in the streets of Tehran after the death of a young woman who was not wearing her hijab correctly. And here's what he had to say. Let's play that. This is Iran's supreme leader.
Who did the planning? I say it is clear that the planning was done by America, the fake usurping Zionist regime and their followers.
What do you say to that? And what would you like to see the Biden administration do in this very important moment where people are rising up against this repressive regime?
Hey, Martha, that actually sounds a lot like Vladimir Putin blaming someone else for the problems now inside of their own country. But as for Iran, we should be providing them with moral support. This isn't the Israelis, this isn't the Jews, this isn't the Americans, this is the Iranian people rising up to demand freedom and liberty, to get outside of the tyranny that they've had. What we certainly should not be doing is providing them money and resources. And this administration hasn't enforced the sanctions and is trying to get back in a deal that will give the very regime that these people are attempting to overthrow more money and more resources. That's a bad idea. It's not healthy for the Iranian people. It's not good for the Israelis. And it's terrible for the United States of America as well.
We'll see if the White House wants to, sort of make it very clear whose side we're on in Iran right now after the death of Mahsa Amini, who has become a symbol of tremendous repression in the country. 300 political prisoners taken under this current regime in Iran. Thank you very much.
When there were protests on our watch, Martha, we made clear who we supported. It was the Iranian people.
Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, always good to see you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.